Really excited to get into this one.
Yeah, so today we are specifically exploring how the Lexington Fayette Urban County government, um, known locally as LFUCG, actually runs the city.
Right, the day-to-day nuts and bolts.
Exactly. So for those of you listening, we have pulled together this big stack of meeting transcripts, planning commission documents, and some local news briefs.
Mhm.
And the mission today is to extract the underlying logic of local power, really, by dissecting one incredibly narrow yet kind of fascinating piece of paperwork.
It really is fascinating. We are talking about a request to change exactly 3 words in the local zoning code.
Just 3 words.
Yeah, literally 3 words. We're looking at Keeneland, which, is this
Mhm.
beloved 240-year-old local institution, asking the city for what seems like a microscopic legal tweak.
Right.
But this tiny request, it opens up a massive window into how land use decisions, zoning laws, and, well, civic authority actually operate behind the scenes.
I mean, the best way I can describe this, it is like finding a single loose thread on a really nice Kentucky sweater.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Right. At first, it is just a tiny little string, but you pull it, and suddenly you are unraveling the entire structural fabric of city planning.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to really understand the zoning code, I think we first need to look at the human, sort of small business story that forced this whole issue into the spotlight.
The maker's mark mystery, basically.
Exactly. So imagine you are walking through downtown Lexington City Center. Up until recently, you would have seen Keeneland Mercantile.
Right. They operated as this really nice retail outpost.
Hmm.
They were selling apparel, hats, the usual high-end logo merchandise.
Mhm.
But crucially, they also sold these commemorative maker's mark bottles that were licensed specifically to Keeneland.
Right. And when that store shut down, it triggered a very specific domino effect under Kentucky alcohol licensing law.
Yeah, it really did.
For those of you who own a business, or if you have ever dealt with liquor authorities, you know this is a heavily, heavily regulated space.
Oh, big time.
The law dictates that if you hold a packaged liquor license and you close your retail location, you cannot simply, put the license in a drawer for a rainy day.
No, you definitely cannot do that.
And you cannot easily sell it to the highest bidder either. You basically either abandon the license completely or you transfer it to a specific physical address that you already control.
And we should probably pause here and look at why that legal mechanism even exists.
Yeah, let's get into that.
So, Kentucky's alcohol regulations, like a lot of them across the country, are deeply rooted in these post-prohibition anxieties.
Right. The state intentionally designed the framework so that liquor licenses do not just become these tradable commodities on an open secondary market.
Exactly. They do not want speculators hoarding licenses to manipulate local economies.
Yeah.
So the law ties the license strictly to an active physical operation.
Just to maintain strict geographic control over where alcohol is actually sold.
Right. So Keeneland looks at their options and decides, well, let's just transfer the license to the only other major property we own in town.
Which is the racetrack out on Versailles Road.
Yep. And that seems like the most logical step. That makes perfect sense.
It does.
But Nick Nicholson, who is the outside counsel for Keeneland, he decides to actually read the zoning code for the racetrack before moving the bottles.
Always a good idea for an attorney.
Right. And he realizes the rule book does not match what they want to do. So what does he do? He self-flags the issue, goes directly to the city, and files a ZO.
Okay, let's define that. For anyone unfamiliar with the terminology of City Hall, ZOT stands for Zoning Ordinance Text Amendment. Simply put, it is just a formal request to rewrite a line of the city's rulebook. But I want to stop and, challenge this strategy entirely.
Okay.
Keeneland is a massive, incredibly powerful entity in Lexington.
True.
Why would they proactively file a public zoning amendment over 3 words? I mean, why not just use the old ask forgiveness, not permission strategy?
It is a fair question.
Right. Why not just quietly move the license, put the commemorative bottles on a shelf in the gift shop, and just operate under the radar? Who is actually going to march into the Keeneland gift shop and demand to see the exact zoning verbiage for a bottle of bourbon?
Well, see, that assumes the risk just ends at a minor fine.
Does it not?
Not really. When you are dealing with the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control in Kentucky, operating outside your specific zoning allowance, it can actually trigger an immediate suspension of your license.
Oh, wow. Okay, that is a big deal.
It is. But looking deeper into the strategy, I mean, Nicholson is a veteran land use attorney.
Right.
He understands that for an institution like Keeneland, Their political capital is basically their most valuable asset.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
If you attempt to circumvent the rules and get caught, you permanently erode trust with the planning staff.
Yeah, and when an institution inevitably needs a major favor down the road, say expanding a grandstand or building a massive new facility, the city is going to remember if you were an honest broker or a rule breaker.
Exactly. So the strategy is fundamentally about preserving long-term institutional trust.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's examine what the Zotia actually does. We're talking about altering the rules in the AR zone.
Yes.
And for you listening, AR stands for Agricultural Rural. It is the specific set of rules designed to govern Lexington's iconic horse farms and rolling hills.
And to understand the weight of this, you really need to understand the history of Lexington's planning.
Right, going back to the 50s.
Yeah, in 1958, Lexington created the nation's first urban services boundary. They drew this hard line around the city to prevent urban sprawl from just, destroying the surrounding bluegrass.
Which is why the AR zone is fiercely protected today.
Changing any rule within that zone undergoes intense scrutiny because the city's primary fear is turning a protected farm into, like, a retail hub.
So the current AR rule states that horse racetracks may serve alcoholic beverages.
Right. And Nicholson zeroes in on that specific word, serve.
Because selling a sealed bottle of Maker's Mark for someone to take home is fundamentally not serving.
Exactly. So Keeneland wants to add language allowing retail sales of packaged liquor as an accessory use.
The regulatory footprint shifts entirely when you change the word serve to sell.
It really does.
The analogy that clarifies this for me is it is the difference between a bartender and a cashier.
Oh, that is a great way to put it.
The law treats those two jobs in entirely different ways. I mean, a bartender controls the environment, right? You consume the drink on the premises under their supervision and they monitor your intake. But a cashier simply hands you a sealed package to take out into the community. They relinquish all control over where and how it is consumed.
And when you introduce that cashier dynamic, the city immediately starts to worry about traffic, litter, and just the broader impact on the rural infrastructure.
Right. So Keeneland attempted to preempt those fears by establishing very specific physical guardrails.
Yeah, they were very proactive about that.
Nicholson went on the record during the hearing stating the bottles would only be placed in the existing gift shop, which operates strictly Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and maybe a future visitor center that hasn't even been built yet.
He also promised the city there would be no liquor barn constructed on the property.
Which is a very important clarification in Kentucky.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He promised they would not allow patrons to purchase a bottle and carry it into the paddock during a live race.
Right.
And he specifically stated they would not allow patrons to buy a bottle and tailgate with it out in the parking lot after 8 races on a, quote, very, very long and fun day.
Which honestly sounds like a Kentucky nightmare to manage.
Yeah, it does.
But the planning staff actually supported this change, Ro.
They did. Jeremy Young, the planner who presented the case, he referenced the Imagine Lexington Comprehensive Plan. He argued that this minor tweak bolsters equine tourism without damaging the rural character of the area. And that is largely because the sales are kept strictly as an accessory use, rather than becoming the primary business.
There was also this really bizarre administrative detail in the staff report that caught my eye.
Oh, yeah, the numbering thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
The city tracks these amendments sequentially, and this specific file was labeled PLN Zotia 26.3.
Right.
However, they completely skipped numbers 1 and 2. It just appears to be a clerical glitch in the bureaucratic machinery that everyone noticed, accepted, and just moved past.
Local government at its finest. But, setting the paperwork aside, the staff noted an incredibly important nuance about how this law functions in reality.
Okay.
This change is site-specific in practice, but not in legal effect.
Let's clarify that for the listener, because that is a bit dense. The new law will not explicitly state Keeneland can sell packaged liquor.
Right. The revised text just dictates that, quote, horse racetracks in the AR zone can sell packaged liquor.
So technically, this applies to any facility meeting that definition.
Technically, yes. However, in the entirety of Fayette County's agricultural zone, Keeneland is the only horse racetrack.
Meaning, if you own a neighboring farm, you cannot suddenly use this rule to open a liquor store.
No.
You would have to successfully navigate the impossible barrier of building a fully functioning racetrack first.
Good luck with that.
Right. But moving to the regulators, this is where the skepticism really kicks in.
Yeah, the committee members had some thoughts.
When you put a corporate promise up against the actual letter of the law, the tension definitely rises. Commissioner Melanie Davis looked at this request and started asking about scope creep.
She made a really pointed observation. She pointed out that while Keeneland promises to only sell commemorative bottles, the new text does not specify product types at all.
Right, it simply says retail sale of alcoholic beverages.
Exactly.
So she asked, what physically or legally prevents Keeneland from turning their gift shop into a high-volume liquor operation, selling vodka, tequila, and massive cases of beer?
And Nicholson conceded the point. He admitted the text itself does not stop them from expanding.
Well, then what does?
His entire defense relied on this zoning mechanism called a conditional use permit, or a CUP.
Okay. For anyone who hasn't encountered a CUP, let's explore how it functions. As we discussed, the agricultural rural zone is legally reserved for farming.
Right.
And a massive entertainment venue drawing tens of thousands of people is decidedly not a farm.
Definitely not.
So the only reason Keeneland legally operates in that zone is because the city granted them a conditional use permit. It is essentially a highly revocable permission slip.
And the referees who hold the power to revoke that slip are the Board of Adjustment.
Okay.
So Nicholson argued that if Keeneland abuses this tiny three-word zoning tweak and they start operating a massive liquor barn, the Board of Adjustment will haul them in and threaten to revoke their permit to race horses entirely.
He even pointed directly at a Board of Adjustment member, Brandon Gross, who just happened to be sitting in the hearing room at the time.
Yeah, he really leaned into that argument.
But I have to challenge this backstop, because honestly, it feels entirely theoretical to me.
You think so?
I mean, think about it. You are telling me the ultimate safeguard against Keeneland selling too much vodka is the threat of shutting down the entire operation.
That is the legal mechanism, yeah.
Let's play this out in the real world. Would the local government actually threaten to destroy the city's most iconic economic engine over a gift shop dispute? That sounds like a bluff the city would never, ever call.
Well, you are highlighting the massive gulf between legal authority and political reality there.
Right.
Politically, shutting down Keeneland would be a localized earthquake. The city council would face immense, probably insurmountable, backlash.
Exactly.
However, Nicholson's argument is fundamentally about institutional risk tolerance.
Okay, explain that.
Keeneland's board of directors operates a multi-million-dollar enterprise. They are not going to play chicken with their foundational operating permit.
I suppose that makes sense.
Even a drawn-out public hearing in front of the Board of Adjustment would cause a massive hit to their reputation. They police themselves because they can never afford to even be in the crosshairs of that theoretical penalty.
Okay, fair enough. But Commissioner Zach Davis pressed on this vulnerability as well.
He did.
He asked if they could just write the strict sales hours directly into the law to avoid relying on that extreme theoretical penalty.
And Nicholson declined.
He pointed out that the current ordinance does not codify hours for their by-the-drink service either. He argued that liability exposure basically keeps them in check.
Right. If they overserve someone who then causes an accident, Keeneland is on the list financially and legally.
But during that specific exchange, Nicholson also introduced a fascinating piece of trivia into the public record that really shifts how you view the property.
Oh, the deed restriction, yes.
He mentioned that Keeneland is bound by a historical deed restriction, mandating they remain open to the public 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And furthermore, if the property ever ceases to be a horse racetrack, the land does not get sold to a private developer. It automatically reverts to the city to become a public park.
Which is incredible. We tend to view Keeneland purely as a private corporate powerhouse.
Right.
But legally, they have this structural tether to the public good.
Yeah.
It makes the city's relationship with them much more collaborative than antagonistic.
It really does. But as engaging as that local history is, we have to zoom out now.
Yeah, we do.
Because while the committee was intensely focused on Keeneland and bourbon bottles, a local resident named Amy Clark stepped up to the microphone during public comment and just blew this entire conversation wide open.
She really did. She introduced a procedural challenge that travels far, far beyond commemorative bourbon bottles.
Clark highlighted a direct structural clash between the state of Kentucky and the local Lexington government. She read from a Kentucky state statute dictating that a zoning ordinance text amendment, a zuzote, should only originate with a planning commission, a fiscal court, or a legislative body.
Right. So essentially, the state law mandates that only elected or appointed government officials should be writing the zoning rules.
Exactly. But then she pointed to Lexington's local ordinance, Section 6.2, which explicitly states Zoto, quote, may originate with any person or governmental body.
Any person is the critical phrase there.
Meaning a private company, a real estate developer, or a well-funded lobbyist can draft a rewrite of the city's zoning code, hand it to the city, and ask for a binding vote.
Yeah.
Let's dig into why the state would write a law trying to prevent that in the first place.
Well, the state statute is designed to protect democratic control over city planning.
Right.
Zoning is supposed to be a holistic exercise. When a city planner writes a rule, they are theoretically analyzing the traffic, the environmental impact, the strain on public utilities, and the long-term health of the entire community.
But when a private attorney drafts a rule, they are simply fulfilling a fiduciary duty to a specific client.
Exactly. The state law aims to prevent private interests from steering public infrastructure. It guards against what planners call spot zoning.
And spot zoning is where rules are altered purely to benefit one specific parcel of land, right?
Spot on.
So how is Lexington operating under a local rule that says the exact opposite of the state mandate? I mean, does the urban county government structure give them some sort of special exemption?
Well, Amy Clark argues they do not have an exemption. She claims the local ordinance is ultra vires.
Ultra vires.
Yeah, it is a legal term meaning an act performed without any authority to act on that subject.
Oh, I see.
She is arguing that because the local rule exceeds the boundaries set by the state, all of these applicant-driven text amendments are technically legally invalid.
Wow. This completely reframes the entire discussion.
It really does.
For you listening at home, think about your own neighborhood for a second. Should one private company be allowed to drive a change in the city's zoning code, even a seemingly harmless one?
It is a big question.
And Amy Clark actually stated she wasn't particularly upset about Keeneland's specific request.
Right.
She used her public comment time here because another Zodia was on the docket that day for an economic development zone, which she viewed as a dangerous example of a developer tailoring the rules for their own site.
Yeah, and when the committee invited Nicholson back to the microphone to rebut her claim, he offered a highly technical defense.
What did he say?
He argued that the legislative body, meaning the city council, possesses the inherent authority to delegate its power.
Oh, okay.
He compared it to the Planning Commission delegating minor plat reviews to city staff. He also noted that the city council previously reviewed Clark's interpretation in a separate case, and they chose to leave the local ordinance intact.
So his defense is essentially, hey, we didn't write the local rule book. We were just playing by the rules you gave us.
Pretty much. And, the zoning subcommittee is not the venue to overturn a city ordinance anyway.
Right. They lack the jurisdiction to declare a local law invalid.
But Amy Clark's comment places a massive, unresolved procedural question onto the public record. Every time a developer initiates a text change in Lexington moving forward, this underlying tension regarding state versus local authority just remains unresolved, hovering over the proceedings.
It is like a dark cloud over every land use decision. But bringing this back to the immediate reality of the hearing, the subcommittee couldn't solve a philosophical crisis of governance on a Tuesday afternoon.
No, they had a job to do.
They had to vote on the Keeneland request, and the zoning subcommittee unanimously recommended approval.
Yep.
The motion was made by Commissioner Molly Davis and seconded by Commissioner Forrester.
And for listeners keeping track of how local government moves, that is merely step one of a very long procedural marathon.
Right. Following that unanimous recommendation, the request moves to the full Planning Commission for formal adoption. Assuming it survives that hurdle, it travels to the Urban County Council, which is the body that holds the ultimate authority on all zoning amendments.
And that council process involves a first reading, a second reading, and eventually a final vote.
There is currently no timeline set for that final vote, so we are looking at a 3-word change that requires 3 distinct layers of process and likely months to navigate the machinery of local government.
Which really demonstrates how intentionally slow and deliberate the system is built to be.
Yeah.
It forces public scrutiny at every level to ensure changes align with the comprehensive change.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want you to consider a completely different angle on this story.
Okay.
We've spent this whole time discussing how a 240-year-old local titan navigates an incredibly rigid, century-old zoning framework that was built for a 20th century agrarian economy.
Right.
Keeneland had to trigger a multi-month legislative battle just to legally sell commemorative bottles. But looking ahead, imagine what happens when massive systemic pressures hit this region, like If shifting climate patterns significantly alter the viability of bluegrass farming, or if changing generational entertainment habits force historic equine institutions to fundamentally reinvent their entire business models,
Yeah.
how will this fragile, hyper-specific rulebook hold up?
That is a great question.
Will these institutions have to rewrite the zoning code word by word, fighting month-long battles over single sentences? Or will the entire regulatory system eventually require a radical redesign just to allow these historic places to survive?
It forces you to wonder if the rigid rules originally designed to protect our history might eventually become the very barriers preventing these institutions from adapting to the future.
It really does. Keep an eye on City Hall. You never know what massive philosophical debates about the future of the city are hiding behind a single commemorative bottle of bourbon.
Lexington, if you're tuning in